For more than 100 years, two absolute titans, France and Great Britain, were locked in this epic, globe-spanning rivalry. They were fighting for total dominance, everywhere from the fields of Europe to the forests of North America. So let's dive right into this and take a look at their legendary war machines.
You know, it's a question that historians still love to debate. Was it the massive, super well-organized French army, which was really the benchmark for power on the continent? Or was it that smaller, scrappier British force that, against all odds, would go on to build a global empire? Well, the answer is way more complicated, and honestly a lot more interesting than you might think.
Okay, so the biggest difference really just boils down to geography and ambition. France, right? It's a continental power, surrounded by rivals, so it poured just about all of its resources into creating this massive land army. But Britain, it's an island, so it naturally prioritized its navy, the Royal Navy, to protect its trade routes and project its power across the oceans. And that one strategic choice, well, it shaped absolutely everything that came after.
So first up, let's talk about the French army. In the 18th century, these guys were the undisputed Goliaths of European land warfare. I mean, they were the standard that every other country was desperately trying to copy.
And when I say Goliath, I really mean it. At its peak, the French army could call up a staggering 400,000 men. To put that in perspective, that was a fighting force of a size and scale that most other European powers, especially Britain, could only dream of having.
But here's the thing. It wasn't just about the raw numbers. The French army was also just better organized. They had this unified command structure, and they were true pioneers in military theory. They were constantly testing and fine-tuning new tactics on a massive scale. This was the army that professionalized artillery and came up with early versions of the divisional system, which gave them this incredible flexibility on the battlefield.
And if you want a perfect example, just look at what happened at Vassieux in 1778. They put 30,000 soldiers in the field, not for a war, but just for a huge real-world experiment to test new tactical formations. I mean, who does that? That level of strategic thinking was just on another planet compared to their rivals.
All right, now let's hop across the English Channel and look at the British Army. And, well, compared to that French behemoth, they looked a little chaotic, to be honest. But underneath all that apparent mess was this core of almost unbelievable toughness.
This quote from historian Philip Haythornthwaite just says it all, doesn't it? As late as 1792, the British Army had no standard way of doing things, no standardized drill. Each regiment was like its own little kingdom with its own unique way of marching, of fighting. Can you imagine trying to coordinate a big attack when every single unit moves differently? It sounds like an absolute recipe for disaster.
So the obvious question is, were they just a total mess? How in the world could an army like this even hope to win against the super organized French? Well, what looked like a massive weakness was, weirdly enough, also its greatest strength.
This quote, "This is one of the most revealing things you'll ever read from that whole era. At the Battle of Waterloo, officers were asked if they thought their own regiment might break, and the answer was always some version of this. Us? Never. But, you know, maybe those other guys over there might." And that points to this intense, almost arrogant pride in their own specific unit.
And that right there is the key. The British Army wasn't really one single army. It was more like a collection of incredibly stubborn families called regiments. So if one regiment broke and ran, the one next to it wouldn't panic and run with them. No way. They'd probably make fun of the guys running away and then fight even harder out of pure pride. And that made a British line of battle incredibly hard to break.
Hey, you don't have to take my word for it. This is what one of Napoleon's best generals, Marshal Soult, had to say after a particularly brutal battle. This bulldog courage was absolutely legendary, and it earned the grudging respect of France's very best soldiers.
But this huge global rivalry wasn't just decided on the battlefields of Europe. The real clash of these empires, where these two military styles were really put to the test, happened thousands of miles away in the colonies, where the rules of war were completely different.
So here in the vast forest of North America, the fight was less about giant armies clashing in neat lines and more about strategy, logistics, and two totally different ways of building an empire. This was the real battleground.
So France's approach to colonizing was all about trade and key alliances. They built this huge network of forts deep in the interior and relied heavily on their Amerindian allies to control massive territories with very few soldiers. The British, on the other hand, were all about settlement and farming, and they used their powerful navy to blockade and attack French territory from the sea. In this great imperial chess match, it all came to a head in one of the most important battles in North American history. The fight for the city of Quebec, sitting way up on those cliffs above the St. Lawrence River. This was the battle that would decide the fate of a whole continent.
And on the plains of Abraham, that British bulldog discipline paid off in the most spectacular way. The British infantry just marched steadily toward the French line, taking fire, losing men, but they held their nerve. They did not fire back until they were practically face-to-face with the enemy. And then they stopped and unleashed one single perfectly timed volley that just shattered the French line. It was an absolutely terrifying display of controlled violence. But the battle wasn't just won by that one volley. The real strategic genius was Britain's mastery of combined Army-Navy operations. The Royal Navy sailed the Army into position for this incredibly daring surprise attack, landing them right at the base of the cliffs. It was a masterstroke of combined arms that the French commander Montcalm just completely failed to see coming. That victory at Quebec, it was a huge turning point. It marked the beginning of the end for New France, and it set the stage for the dramatic rise of the British Empire. And it also completely changed the reputation of the British Army forever.
And this transformation was pretty incredible. The same British infantry that was kind of dismissed by Europeans in the mid-1700s, once it finally got its act together and adopted standardized drills in 1792, would by the Napoleonic Wars be considered by the French themselves to be the best infantry they had ever faced. What a glow up.
So, to kind of wrap it all up, on one side you have the French Goliath, huge, centralized, and brilliantly designed for a big war on the continent. And on the other, you've got the British Bulldog, smaller, decentralized, but with this unbelievable resilience and discipline that was just perfect for the kind of global expeditionary warfare that would go on to build an empire. And that leaves us with a really fascinating final thought. Maybe the question isn't who had the better army, but who had the right tool for the job. France built the perfect army to dominate Europe, but Britain, almost by accident, built the perfect army to go out and conquer the world.